Welcome once again, fight fans, DAZN MMA. Sean O'Connell, Dan Hardy, coming off our final regular season event in the Professional Fighters League in Atlanta. Welterweights, lightweights took center stage, earning their playoff spots, one last chance to snag points and figure out where they can be seated. And we had some crazy, and I mean crazy moments in a great night of fights. Dan, I want to start with Sadibou Sy in the co-main event, all right? Because this is such a foreign concept to somebody who fought like me, who approached fights like me, who never had the sort of like calm, calculated approach that obviously Sadibou and maybe Dan Hardy had at some point. Sadibou told us in the fighter meetings and, you know, when sitting down for his on-camera interview to create little promo pieces, he said, not only am I going to win this fight, not only am I going to win by knockout, I'm going to create a viral highlight that will sweep MMA Twitter. Those weren't his words, those are my words. But he saw something on film, saw something with the matchup, had been working on something in the gym and said, watch what I'm about to do. And then he went out there and he tried the wheel kick in the first round. And he tried again in the second round. And then in the third round, he got the distance dialed in and he delivered exactly what he said he was going to deliver. A highlight reel knockout, a walk-off, a knockout of the year candidate already halfway through the calendar year in mixed martial arts. Sadibou Sy, he promised what he was going to give us. And then he delivered on the promise, and I am absolutely in awe, Dan Hardy.
It was incredible. And you know what's even more impressive is that he went through the process of telling us that he was going to do something special and, you know, then trying it a couple of times, as you mentioned. So you knew that he'd planned that and he'd been drilling that in training camp. And you know, the second time, he just caught him with his toes, didn't he? Just kind of slapped him with the bottom of his foot. But that third time, just pulled him into range perfectly and caught him clean. I mean, it was such a measured performance. And you know, when you're so tall and rangy as a welterweight, you know, you expect to feel cramped and closed down in there. And so for him to keep creating space for himself, he kept hammering the body with that lead left kick. Like he's just lethal. You know, he's a very unique and special athlete. And to see how calculated he is in those moments, yeah. I'm excited to see, you know, I'm excited to see how he does it in the playoffs now, because of course, you know, there's some very tough grapplers, some very tough wrestlers that he's going to run into. I know he's evolved, so we'll see if he can keep it in the striking range. But now, after seeing that, I expect surprises from him at every range. So who knows what's going to happen?
And by the way, Shane Mitchell was fighting a decent fight against Sadibou Sy. And Sadibou just pulled away and landed what he said he was going to land. Unbelievable. Go check out the highlight. You can find it anywhere on social media, but PFL MMA has it with sound, without sound, with Dan Hardy's reaction, with everything.
My stupid face. They're putting that on everything now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Dan Hardy's shocked face.
Yeah. Almost knocked me out at the same time. Yeah, it was brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. And look, Sadibou Sy was accused, you know, in past seasons of trying to like fight carefully because he didn't want to get taken down. Now he's so confident with his takedown defense. When you mentioned that he's got some tough grapplers in the bracket, he's so confident with his takedown defense that he can do what he's been doing, right? He's coming off back-to-back finishes. This is going to be a fascinating welterweight playoff. Very excited about it. So that was the co-main event. And then in the main event, you had another guy, Olivier Aubin-Mercier, right, who had been at times in his career kind of fallen victim to the same same thing that plagued Georges St-Pierre who of course is the mentor of OAM. When GSP was defending back-to-back titles, right, he started to fight very safe, right? He knew the things that he had advantages over opponent. I'm going to have a faster jab. I'm going to be a better wrestler. I'm going to use those things, and I'm going to win because of it. And OAM was the master game planner, the guy who was just like, you know, I'm not going to take any risks in this fight. But again, he's still getting better. He's still developing. And because of that, we are seeing a much more dangerous version of OAM. And we saw, again, he tried to throw the high kick. It ended up landing. The knee ended up landing. and then he drops the freaking hand of God with the right hand coming down from the top, and another finish for OAM. So these are guys who won a title last year in Sadibou Sy and Olivier Aubin-Mercier and are getting better and more dangerous in an attempt to defend, an attempt to repeat as title holders. And I'm excited about both of them.
Yeah, 100%. I kind of feel like, you know, as you mentioned with Sadibou Sy, he went through that stage where he was kind of finding his confidence with his takedown defense. I kind of feel like OAM's gone through the similar kind of process of like finding his feet inside the smart cage and understanding the range that he's best suited at. You know, he's had some really calculated performances, but I mean, especially with the Stevie Ray fight, you could see how focused he was on one particular target, dismantling it very, very measured until the finish presented itself. But it's almost like now he knows he's kind of found his range and his rhythm. He's starting to pick up these stoppages. I think they're both very, very impressive, and I think it's an interesting, and you'll be able to tell me better, but it's an interesting shift of mentality when I mean, he was the champion last year, but he's not technically coming in with the belt, you know, over his shoulder in the regular season fights. He's another one of the contenders, you know, in the regular season. So it's less about people kind of chasing him and more about him reestablishing himself as the best in the division. I think that's an interesting mentality because, you know, you relate to GSP and then you think to yourself, well, he was always fighting the best guy because he was holding the belt and kept playing King of the Hill. But you know, you're King of the Hill 1 year and then you throw him back into the mix at the start of the next year and you have to just, you know, swim with sharks again and prove it.
It's my favorite thing about the PFL format because I'm a traditional sports guy, right? I mean, my first love was American football, and I do a sports radio show for hell's sake. I pay very close attention to all sports, and that's the format in every sport, right? You win a national championship in college sports here in the United States, you're right back with everyone else. Now, of course, you're set up for success because you have good players on the team and things like that, but you're not given any sort of advantage automatically just because you were the champion the previous year. In mixed martial arts, maybe you're not being given an advantage, maybe you're being given a disadvantage because you just brought up the point that now you definitely have to face the best guy after yourself over and over again, right? But in NBA basketball, in Major League Baseball, in NHL hockey, in Champions League football over across the pond, like you win a championship and you hit the reset button every single year. It's the best thing about the format because when you're the guy who's chasing, when you're the individual who wants an opportunity to win that $1 million and that PFL belt for the first time, yeah, you run into a situation in the playoffs where you don't have your best night, you lose a fight. In every other league, in the UFC, in Bellator, in whatever else, in one championship, now you've got to fight your way back for over a 2 or 3 year period to be the number one contender again, and then maybe you'll be given another title shot. That's not the case in the PFL. Clay Collard is a great example of this, right? Clay Collard has been one of the most exciting mixed martial artists in the world for the last 4 or 5 years. He hasn't got himself all the way dialed in, been focused enough in certain matchups or in certain fights, and he's come up short in his chase for a PFL championship. But every season he's been able to hit the reset button, and now he's the number 1 seed in the lightweight division. So maybe that leads to a matchup, down the road against OAM, last year's champ. Maybe OAM doesn't get out of the semifinal. We will find out in August in New York City. But the fact that the right guys are here because they earned this spot and they're getting finishes and they're dangerous against tough opponents makes me feel really good about the brackets.
Yeah, I mean, Clay Collard's a great example of what you were saying, you know. And interestingly, if he does face off against OAM, imagine if we have a really calculated Clay Collard and a really, you know, hungry for the finish OAM, it would almost be like they've switched roles.
Yeah,
yeah, you know, it's very exciting the fact that, you know, these guys know they're back in the mix at the start of the year again. You know, a lot of the fighters spoke about over this week were, you know, just how mentally exhausting it is to be in this process and to know that, right, I win this one, then I'm locked in to go again. That would make me excited as a fighter, but I can imagine if I was putting myself through those training camps and knowing that I'm going again. Like I was chatting to Impa Kasangane at the airport And he was saying the same thing. He's like, right, straight back to work. And I feel exhausted today from my journey home yesterday. And I open Instagram, and Impa Kasanganay is like working out in his driveway, looking like, like the Hulk. It's a crazy process to put yourself through. I can't help but admire and respect these athletes.
Yeah, look, we keep saying on the broadcast, toughest test. And sometimes that can get glib, can be cliche, but like at the end of the day, having gone through it, it's hard to imagine anything that's more mentally taxing and harder on your body than back to back to back to back professional mixed martial arts fights against people who are all seeking a $1 million opportunity. The biggest payday for everyone, for the most part, in their career. So everyone is equally hungry. It's pretty awesome. It's why I love the PFL format. We do have to address the lone negative, the lone downside of an incredible night of fights in Atlanta. I mean, you had Bruno Miranda, Alexander Martinez delivered a fight of the year candidate. It was just such a great night. And then you had a situation where two friends and teammates were matched up previous to the playoffs. Natan, Schulte, Raush, Manfio. I cannot overstate how close these people are in their personal lives. And they were given the task as professional athletes, squaring off against one another in the smart cage. And the fight that ensued was lackluster is the ultimate understatement in this case. It was completely below the standard of a professional mixed martial arts fight. It was the equivalent of a light sparring session. And as a result, I want to make sure I get the language right, okay? I'm going to read the official PFL statement on this, because this is what happened. The PFL 6 and Natan, Schulte, and Raush Manfio did not meet the standards which all PFL fighters agree to uphold in competition. PFL immediately suspended both fighters from the season, deemed the fight to have 0 points for the purposes of league standings. So Natan Schulte was given the decision victory because he got some takedowns in the fight. Did no damage from the top, did no damage from control, threatened no submissions. He won the fight. He gets no points because there is a clause in every PFL contract that you will compete to the best of your ability. You'll use effort and technique and all that, so you will try to win the fight. And of course, I'm paraphrasing there. And neither of these guys truly tried to win the fight, so they were both suspended. 0 points means that Natan Schulte does not get the extra 3 points to add to his original 3 from his win in Las Vegas. And they're both disqualified. Raush and Natan are both disqualified. So both of them out of the playoffs. Neither have an opportunity to continue $1 million journey. Just an unfortunate development all around, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, I can't help but feel disappointed for the fighters, kind of before and after the event, just kind of having to, having to go through that process of fighting a friend. But at the same time, it's kind of like, it's kind of business is business. I mean, I've fought a couple of friends in the past, not to the same kind of closeness of relationship as this situation, but I appreciate that when they're stepping in there in the cage against me, that they're going to intend on doing the same thing, and almost out of respect. That's why I'm perhaps seen to be so heavy on the referees sometimes, because it's their responsibility to make sure everyone's safe in there. And, the purpose of having a referee that can keep everyone safe is because the two people in there are trying to really, really hurt each other. And that wasn't happening in that fight. It was odd. It felt weird, especially because the event was rolling. We had such good fights, and they're both exciting fighters. People get excited to see those two as individuals perform, and it was an odd event. There was no coaching coming from the corners. There was no atmosphere in there. There was no intention on either side of the fighters. Like, there were a few situations, especially where Schulte was kind of working towards the back of Manfio, where he could have really unloaded. And if it was somebody else, he would have done. And there was that constant conflict all the way through. And then even after the fight, straight away, Manfio walked back to his corner looking just disappointed in himself. And Natan Schulte was in tears in his corner. It was an odd and unfortunate situation, but the thing is, I don't know what you do about it, because it's live professional sports. You've got to rely on people to come and compete to the best of their ability. There's a lot on the line. There's people putting money on these fights and stuff, and it's just it's an awkward and uncomfortable situation for everybody. And yeah, I don't really know what more to say about it, to be honest.
Yeah. Thankfully, the rest of the night, I think, more than made up for the lack of action and lack of intention in that particular fight. Everyone else knew the assignment, understood what they were there to do, and even as we saw with the featherweights, as we saw with a couple of the heavyweights, even in the case where maybe you're completely disqualified, right? By the time you step into the smart cage, maybe mathematically you've been eliminated. Everyone else showed up to fight and did what they were supposed to do. So some incredible performances, some big time finishes. The lightweight bracket and the welterweight brackets are set, and those are D2 stacked divisions, I think, in this organization. So you're telling me that we got 4 guys at lightweight and 4 guys at welterweight that are all squaring up. I think I can make a case for any of the 4 in either weight class to be standing wherever it is that championship takes place, to be standing there with a gold belt around their waist or their shoulder and a big comical $1 million check in their hand. I mean, I really think that's how good these brackets are.
Yeah, no, I can't agree more. But I'm also really excited for featherweight as well, because we've had, the last year's champion and, a veteran in Marlon Moraes removed from the playoffs, and 2 young, really exciting fighters in Pineda and Braga. Like, I just felt like there was a kind of a changing of the guard there. And, of course, I mean, Marlon's retired. Of course, we're going to see Brendan Loughnane regroup and come back strong. But the fact that we've got 2, young prospects in that division is going to really make things very interesting.
Yeah, it's Bubba Jenkins is the number 1 seed at featherweight, and he's a guy who I liken to what we've talked about with Sadibou especially, and you could probably make the comparison with OAM, although OAM has not had mixed success. He's been undefeated as a pro mixed martial artist in the PFL, right? So he hasn't had ups and downs in the smart cage. Injury has taken him out of the playoffs in the past. Sadibou, he's gone through it. And Bubba Jenkins, it's the same, right? Bubba Jenkins has had to hone and craft and improve himself into being a number 1 seed, into being a guy that looks like a legitimate favorite maybe to win the belt this year. And that's taken progress, and that's taken focus and a ton of hard work, and even a mentality shift from the bad man Bubba Jenkins. So I love seeing it, because that's what's supposed to happen in your mixed martial arts career. You're supposed to live and learn and come back from your losses better, and come back from your wins with something to work on still. And in the PFL, we get to watch it season over season, year by year, as the progress is made. And the results the results speak for themselves, because now Bubba's the number 1 seed, and Sadibou and OAM both have belts already and look like they might be on their way to another.
Yeah, I mean, and Bubba's another good example. It was that loss to Chris Wade that did it, really. I think he perhaps overestimated his preparedness to wrestle that hard, and Chris Wade was able to pick the win up on that night. But then that just leveled him up. It just leveled him up, and that's kind of the ability to stop and regroup and then come back the next season and try again. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for the rest of the year, and we've got Berlin coming up as well, which I know you're preparing hard for.
Yeah, look, PFL Europe, this Berlin card is going to be absolutely incredible. I actually got a little bit bummed out, Dan, because regular season's over. We're already halfway through our global year, right? Our global season. Like, man, I don't want to be done yet. Well, I don't have to wait long before we're sat next to each other in Berlin, calling fights, hungry young people in the cage, trying to prove to everyone that they deserve not only the carrot, that prize at the end of the European schedule, but a place on the global roster, and eventually the ability to chase a $1 million check. Like, I'm telling you, the PFL format, we have a farm system now, like you see in baseball, like you see in soccer, where there's real clear pathways for developing fighters to achieve their dreams, to get to the place that they want to be, to cash the check they want to cash, and eventually to work their way onto the pay-per-view platform as well. It's revolutionizing the game of mixed martial arts, which is why I can feel good about even when we have, a bad night or a bad moment in a good night and an otherwise good night. I get to lay down on a pillow knowing that the PFL is headed to new heights in the sport.